Merry Christmas, everyone! I am Samuel Johnson, and welcome to the Christmas special Retrospectives. And for the first special that we shall look at for this hopefully annual traditional vlog, we are going to be taking a look at the first of a trilogy of holiday-themed films, The Santa Claus. Now, before we get into the plot, before we get into the Santa Claus, I should probably get into my history with the film series prior to seeing them. The Santa Claus was a film that actually came out before I was born. I think it was maybe like 2 or 3 years before I was born, and put simply, didn't really know much about it. All I really knew was that all I really mostly knew about the special of the movie was just that the poster was of Tim Allen in a fat suit, and they were saying, "Well, he used to say, well, guess what? He's Santa Claus," and I'm like, it's Tim Allen in a suit. It doesn't really look that way. But the film was popular. People did kind of gravitate towards it, and its success did result in sequels being made. And even nowadays, there's a Disney Plus show out about, well, the Santa Claus, or it's called the Santa Clauses, put simply. But pretty much, the film became a cult classic, and many people still watch this film to this day. And of course, it's loved. It's considered a holiday classic, and for the longest time when I was a kid, I was just curious about it. I had seen the sequels advertised, but nothing really made me go, "Oh, I want to see that." It was more just simple curiosity, like, what about these films made me want to go back to them? What made people want to go back to them? What made people so interested in them? And they didn't look bad. It's just that it also felt like the Disney live action cheesiness that you kind of expect from a Disney Channel original movie. So I really did not know what to expect, but I was curious, so to speak. And so one day, while out shopping with my mother, I wound up finding a box set that had all three movies, and I wanted to get it. So I did, and I actually found myself liking the movies. I thought they were actually pretty good, and I thought they had something to them that made me realize, okay, I can see why people like this. And so I wound up liking them too. And as a result, I do like to at least take some time every once in a while, every year, to pop in one of these movies and see how they are. Just enjoy the minutia of it. But are the films worth it? Are the films worthy of all the praise they receive? Well, to answer that question, we shall be looking at the first one. As I said, let's talk about the Santa Claus. Now, again, since this is the first video of these vlogs, if you're unfamiliar with my type of vlogging, what I typically do is, like I said, I usually like to go over the entire plot of whatever I'm looking at before going over what I feel are the pros and cons of the film. So with that being said, let's get to the plot summary. And apologies if this is long, but it's a film, and plot summaries for films typically take longer than like an episode or a special or something. So anyway, our main character for the Santa Claus is a businessman by the name of Scott Calvin. He works for a toy-making company, well, specifically in the advertising section. He usually is in charge of developing the ads, making something look good, and just overall selling toys, so to speak. And of course, it's Christmas Eve, and he's damn good at it, and he's good at his job. He's recently found success with marketing the Do It All For You dolly, which I guess it's a doll that's supposed to, as it says, do everything for you. Excuse me a second. Sorry, puppy walked in. Anyway, but at the same time, though, while he's good at his job in terms of familial obligations, he's not that great. He's divorced from his. He's a divorcee. His wife has pretty much already remarried to a psychiatrist named Neil, and his relationship with his son is, I don't want to say estranged, but it's getting there. Not helped by the fact that sadly and to the point, he's not a good dad, or kind of a good person. I'm not going to call him awful, but it's clear he's on the path. As on Christmas Eve, he's supposed to be spending the night with his son, but he spent so much time celebrating for the doll that he became late, and so he's just making excuses about why he's not there, which is him calling his wife saying he's stuck in traffic when there's barely any cars on the road. It's pretty much just him BSing, and it has had an effect on the relationship with his son, who, while it's clear his son does want a relationship with him, it's clear that his father's attitude really does make that a difficult task to achieve. Not which is exemplified when the first time you see Scott's son, and his son named Charlie is actually, it looks as though his son is actually hoping his dad doesn't show up. With that, and on top of that, when Charlie is dropped off at Scott's place for Christmas Eve, well, he just can't wait to get out of there. He's even pressuring his mom to say, "When the sun comes up, you're gonna come back and get me, right?" But it's not. But of course, while Scott is kind of on the road to being a bad father, he still does try to put in some effort, and part of that effort is trying to keep his son's imagination alive, because apparently his ex-wife and her new husband Neil have told their son there's no such thing as Santa Claus, which he thinks is not something they should be doing, or at the very least he should be included in the process if they're going to crush his son's dreams. So he thinks that maybe they should have talked with him about this before they did this. But even his ex-wife admits it was more of a spur of the moment thing, because one of the big kids told him that there was no such thing as Santa, and they just kind of had to find a way to break it to him without, breaking him, so to speak. Irregardless, Scott is still trying to say, no, you see, your mother and Neil were naughty this year, and they're just getting lots of coal. See, there's a coal this year. So, I'm an adult, I believe in Santa, and it's clear he's trying, but it's also clear he's also BSing. Not helped by the fact that when Charlie does end up staying the night, when Scott tries making Christmas dinner, it goes up in flames. So, it's clear, and yeah, he's trying to make the best of it, trying to hype it up, but it's clear Charlie is miserable. Nevertheless, Charlie does still want to believe in his dad, to the point where when Scott puts him down for the night so they can get some rest, when Scott puts him down for the night and is even reading him towards the night before Christmas, Charlie is asking some questions about it, like about how the reindeer work, how can Santa fly, how can he fit down chimneys if he's so fat, and even by the end, he tells his dad that maybe they should still leave out some milk and cookies just in case. I do like that, and while it's clear that Scott doesn't really want to do all this, again, it's something his son wants, so he's gonna humor him and just to try and make him happy. However, when night falls, it turns out that something does occur. As Charlie is awoken to the sounds of someone stomping on their roof. He goes to get his dad, and when his dad hears it, he initially thinks it's a burglar and tells Charlie to stay put. And when he goes inside to check who it is, he sees Santa Claus. And when he calls out to him, he ends up startling Santa so much, he slips off the roof and falls. To his death. Yes, that's right, people. This movie is all about the thing that jumpstarts the plot of this movie is the main character killing the original Santa. Father of the Year, everybody. Excuse me 1 second. Again, puppy, she wanted out. Anyway, Charlie ends up running out after Santa takes his tumble, and, well, he clearly realizes it's a Santa, but Scott's kind of disbelieving. He's trying to find rational explanations for all of this, and sadly, he's not finding any. Not helped by the fact when he searches Santa for ID, all he finds is a card that says, if anything happens to me, put on my suit, the reindeer will know what to do. And when he goes to check on that, sure enough, there's a sleigh and reindeer on his roof. And yeah, Scott's really having trouble comprehending any of this, while Charlie's getting it right away. It's Santa Claus, and his dad just killed him. But of course, as Scott is trying to figure out where everything's going, a ladder suddenly spontaneously appears on their doorstep, and on top of that, Santa vanishes. He just disappears into the aether, and all that he leaves behind are his clothes. And one of the scenes that kind of gets you is just before he disappears, you see a shot of his body, and he's just and his hand is waving. It's like he's waving goodbye. It's like, oh, that's sad. That is sad. But Scott ends up grabbing the clothes because his rational explanation is that the guy just ran off and is naked somewhere. But again, ladder appears out of nowhere, reindeer on the roof. You kind of want to check it out. At the very least, Charlie wants to check it out, and Scott has to go get him because he doesn't want his son going near strange, dangerous animals and sleighs that appear from out of nowhere. And so they go up there, and while Scott still keeps trying to find rational explanations for this, like maybe the cable company gave them to them as a present, Well, Charlie ain't having any of it. He gets in the sleigh and he thinks that maybe they should get going. Scott, of course, tries to tell him, "No, we gotta go." His son is not budging, and when he finally just tries to put his foot down and say, "Let's go," well, he said that while he was in the sleigh, and the reindeer interpret that as, "Okay, let's go." And they fly off right down the street, with much to Scott's own chagrin, as he almost falls out of his seat. Thankfully, he manages to get his footing, but as they end up flying to another house, and well, yeah, they're clear. It's clearly they're there to do a delivery. While Scott tries once again to say no, we just gotta go, Charlie does keep pushing him, and while Scott keeps trying to say no, this whole thing is stupid, Charlie's able to kind of get him on his side by saying, why is everything I want to do stupid? And so Scott kind of concedes, and well, his son tells him that if he wants to, and his son pretty much tells him if he want to do the job, he got to put on the suit. So Scott, reluctantly and complaining the whole time, does don the Santa suit, which I do kind of love how he's grumbling and how angry he's getting while doing it. But he does put it on. He does go down the guy's chimney, and after dropping off a bunch of toys and getting chased out by a Rottweiler, he gets back in the sleigh, which goes over to the next house. And from there, the rest of his and his son's night is just dropping off presents. Like, they go from house to house. The sack keeps giving him presents, and pretty much no matter where they go, they're able to get into the house. Even places that don't have chimneys are able to spontaneously create them so Scott can come down. There's even one scene early on where at the second house they go to, there's a little girl waiting for Santa, and when she sees Scott, she does, of course, think he's Santa, but he's still being snide and condescending. So he's just clearly having none of the girl's sweetness, as he's just like, "Look, I'm just gonna drop these things off. Now you can either just be quiet and lie there and sleep, or I can just take everything and go." I think it's just amusing. But bottom line, he goes through the whole night delivering toys, presents, a canoe, and even a puppy at one point, and he and Charlie are just having fun. They're actually enjoying themselves, and the more the night goes on, the more Scott gets into it, to the point where he actually is kind of getting more into the Santa role and actually seems to be enjoying himself. Though it's clear that he thinks that this is all a dream. However, eventually, all good things must come to an end, and they do eventually deliver all the presents, and the sun is coming up, so they say, time to go home, and so they tell the reindeer to drop them back off at the house. They don't. In fact, the reindeer instead dropped off at the North Pole. And when Mr. Calvin wants an explanation, the reindeer just run off and leave the sleigh there with Scott and Charlie sitting inside. However, they're not alone for long, as they are greeted by an elf. And one of the things that I do like about this movie is that all the elves in the North Pole are children. And I know that there are going to be people who complain who will say, "Well, this feels like they're not giving little people work," but at the same time, there's just something magical about seeing a North Pole filled with kids running around, having fun, enjoying themselves, making toys, and just being all whimsical and nice. So I like that. I genuinely like that. But anyway, the bottom line, the elf comes out and he pulls out to the North Pole. I just don't like puns. And he activates a little keypad on it that ends up lowering the sleigh down into a cargo hold that's once again full of elves. As such, Scott ends up getting out of the sleigh and just starts asking questions of everyone, like, who's in charge here? Who's the head elf? Who tells you what to do? But no matter what he asks, he always gets the same answer. It's you. So he just wants to know what the hell's going on, and that's when he soon meets the number 2 elf of this place, Bernard, who immediately is just kind of gets straight down to business with Scott. Though when he ends up seeing Scott's son Charlie, he does kind of shift gears and acts nice to him, even giving him a magical snow globe and telling him, "Why don't you hold on to that for me? It might be important later." But put simply, while Bernard sends Charlie off to be shown around the place by another elf named Larry, Scott just wants to know what the hell's going on and why everyone and when he can go home. And so Bernard fills him in on what's happening to him. Put simply, the elves are not lying. He's Santa now. It turns out that the card that he got from the other guy, it said more than just "put on my suit, the reindeer will know what to do." It turns out in the fine print, in the patterns surrounding the card, there's actually a clause, the titular Santa clause. In this case, the clause states that by putting on the suit and getting into the sleigh, you essentially waive the rights to any and all identities you had prior, real or implied, and you take on the role of Santa. Or, to put it in layman's terms, put on the suit, you become the big guy. Well, that's how Bernard puts it. Again, excuse me a sec. Sorry, again, puppy's right here. In fact, she's right here. Look at her. Oh, she's right here. Anyway, so yeah, he's Santa now. And the elves are just okay with it. I'm sure. They just kind of. What I kind of find weird is that on the one hand, I do kind of find it amusing that they're treating this like it's just a business transaction. Like, well, the other guy's gone, so I guess you're the new Santa. But they don't feel any form of emotion towards the fact that the other Santa is dead. I don't know about you, but I would be a little bit more heartbroken. Yeah, I know the job's getting passed along, so it's not like it's gonna just disappear and everything that was Santa Claus is just gonna vanish. But at the same time, the other guy's dead. I would be a little bit more torn up if I were these guys. Is all I'm saying. But bottom line, Bernard says that Scott is now Santa, and well, he kind of doesn't really have a say in the matter because even if he wants to say no, well, then there's nobody to do the job. And part of the reason why they have the whole Santa thing is because it helps keep children's spirit alive. And in Bernard's own words, children hold the spirit of Christmas in their heart, and that if you take Santa away from that, you might as well be killing that spirit. So yeah, if Scott doesn't do the job, he'll be disappointing a bunch of kids around the world. So no pressure or anything. The bottom line, he's not gonna. At the same time, Bernard's not gonna. Scott is not just gonna get thrown in on the deep end right away. Essentially, Bernard tells him that he's got 11 months to get his affairs in order, and they'll have to report to the North Pole by around Thanksgiving. As such, he tells Scott that he and his son will be sent back to their house the next day, but until then, they gotta get prepared. They gotta get all prepped and just to get ready to take a nap because after all, because he's been running around in a suit, gotta get clean, and well, it's been a long night. As such, Charlie and Scott do eventually go down for the night, with Scott even getting a nice pair of silk red pajamas with SC emblazoned on the breast pocket. But even throughout all this, Scott still thinks this is a dream. He even talks to this one elf named Judy, who ends up giving him some hot chocolate, and while he says he sees all this, he doesn't want to believe it. After all, none of this makes sense. Excuse me 1 second. Again, I'm sorry. This is puppy stuff. Again, sorry about that puppy stuff. But bottom line, yeah, Scott's just not believing any of this. But even Judy admits that that's not surprising. Adults don't really believe in magic. But again, it's not. But she kind of counters this by seeing isn't believing. Believing is seeing, and that essentially, if you can believe that these things can be real, then you'll start to accept them. But bottom line, that's not as important right now. And so Scott and Charlie do end up taking a nap for the night. And sure enough, just as Bernard promised, they end up waking up back at Scott's house. There's presents under the tree, they've had an incredible experience, and... Excuse me a second, this is a different thing. A woodpecker. It was a woodpecker. Anyway, yeah, Scott wakes up back in his bed, and, well, initially he does try to write the thing off as a dream, but he's still wearing the silk red pajamas, and it's clear that he's a bit shaken up. Again, he still tries to write it off as a dream, as he thinks that as he tries to find explanations for everything, though he doesn't really know where he got the silk pajamas, and when his ex-wife and Neil come by to pick Charlie up the next day, well, Charlie is still excitedly talking about how he and his dad went to the North Pole. And once again, Scott's just not believing it. He just thinks it was again a dream and that he must have told Charlie about it at some point because he really does not remember anything about this. Again, with the only thing that really feels strange about right now is that he's wearing the silk red pajamas. So again, it's clear he's kind of in denial about this, but bottom line, he tries to just write it off and continue on. With Charlie being sent out to spend Christmas Day with his mother and stepfather, and so all's well that ends well, right? Well, not really. For one thing, Charlie does not stop talking about going to the North Pole. Like, he just keeps showing off about it. He keeps bragging about how his dad is Santa Claus. He begins pretending that he's riding the sleigh, doing the reindeer stuff, and basically over the next few months, Charlie is still excitedly talking about how his dad is St. Nicholas. And of course, people start getting worried about him as they all start to think that this just doesn't make sense. Because even if it was a dream, he still thinks it was real and it's clearly having an effect on him. So they start to think that maybe they need to give him a dose of reality, that maybe they should tell him that Santa isn't real. And while Scott does almost break it to him and say, look, Santa isn't real, he just kind of eventually he finds that he can't do it. Even when he knows what it's doing to him, he just can't bring himself to break his son's belief, and so he just kind of tells him, why don't we try to keep this a secret between us, and while even bribing his son with $5. So that seemingly puts a lid on it. What doesn't put a lid on it is that unfortunately for Scott, the job title of Santa doesn't just come with the title. If you're gonna be Santa, you gotta have to look. You're gonna have to look the look. And so over the course of the next year, Scott begins gradually transforming into Santa. He begins putting on more weight. His hair starts growing out and changing color. He begins growing a beard, and it's even starting to affect his personality as he starts being more passionate about children being educated. He starts get craving for cookies and milk and sweets and so forth. And there's even one hilarious scene where he goes to a pitch for a commercial for this Total Tank toy, and when it talks about how Santa riding around in it, he just starts complaining about every little thing about it. How the elves don't look magical. How Santa can't be driving in a total tank. It's Santa in a sleigh. And the guy's saying, well, he would be if he's trying to sell things. Well, isn't that a pretty picture? Santa riding around in a Panzer. Well, kids, that would have been good this year. It looks like Santa just took out the Pearson home. It's a funny scene. The point is, he is starting to gradually transform, and it's not just affecting his physicality and personality, but it's also affecting various things around him. Like when he goes out for walks, reindeer are drawn to him, and when he's just sitting around in a park, kids are drawn to him and, of course, want to tell him what they want for Christmas because, well, he's Santa Claus, and he's just kind of going with it. And he's even starting to know which kids have been naughty and which kids have been nice, and so on. So he is changing. The problem, however, is that this is not helping his case with Charlie. While Charlie does keep up his end of the bargain and doesn't keep talking about it, sadly, with the physical transformations happening to Scott, people are starting to see this, and sadly his ex-wife and Neil begin to think that he's doing this on purpose to try and get in Charlie's good graces. Hold on a sec, it's the woodpecker again. Again, sorry about that. So anyway, Christmas stuff. Anyway, like I said, Scott's ex-wife and Neil believe that Scott is doing this to get on Charlie's good side, and sadly, the more he transforms, the more they think that what he's doing is just not healthy. And as it keeps going along, and things continue changing, they start feeling like that Scott might not be a good influence on Charlie because, like I said, they're trying. Because the thing is, while they do want childlike wonder, they are also they're also not trying to kid him about the whole Santa thing, and they feel like that if Scott keeps lying to him and saying, oh, Santa is real, then it's just going to eventually hurt Charlie in the end, much more than if they had just they just said, oh, Santa's real, oh, no, he's not. So it just keeps getting worse. So as it keeps going along, yeah, it just keeps getting. Eventually, they start feeling like they need to take drastic measures in order to protect Charlie. And as a result, they end up serving Scott. In this case, they end up wanting to take away his visitation rights with Charlie. And while Scott does try his best to try and normalize himself, sadly, the transformation cannot be undone. Even when he dyes his hair and shaves, it just grows back within seconds. So all his hair just grows back and changes in seconds. So even he realizes he's kind of fucked. And sadly, the final nail in the coffin is on the day of the hearing, when Scott, his ex-wife, and Neil are contemplating this. Charlie goes to talk to the judge, and he tells him everything. And I do mean he tells him everything. And as a result, the judge ends up taking away Scott's visitation rights. As such, Scott does still try to at least have a talk with Charlie, so he does go over to his ex-wife and Neil's around Thanksgiving to try and see him. But while they try and bar him entering, he still manages to get in. and he is just talking with. He does try to talk with Charlie. Tries to say, because Charlie says, look, you got all those kids that rely on you. He says, look, the only kid I'm worried about right now is you. And pretty much Charlie's not taking no for an answer. Everyone keeps telling him, no, he's not Santa. No, what you saw, what happened wasn't real. He keeps saying, no, it was real. Don't you remember, Dad? It's like, come on, remember. And so to kind of exemplify it, he ends up grabbing the snow globe that Bernard gave him and throws it to Scott. And when Scott holds it, he sees the magic. As one of the things that had in the snow globe is that it was actually snowing inside, and you could see a sleigh with reindeer flying across it. And so, as Scott sees it coming to life, it's the final clincher, and he finally does accept that what happened to him was not a dream. Because the whole time he has kind of been in denial about it. Not helped by the fact that that Bernard did end up sending him the naughty and nice list, and it took 4 FedEx trucks to send the whole thing. So But this finally does clinch it, and he is finally content with it. He is finally content about it, but unfortunately, and so he does ask his ex-wife and Neil if he can just be alone with Charlie and say goodbye. But as he's talking with him, and Charlie's now sees that his dad now believes him. But, however, just before Scott can leave, Bernard comes by to pick him up. And so when Charlie sees Bernard, he asks, hey, can I go with you guys? And Bernard's like, well, I don't see a problem with that. What about you? And what I like is that it takes Scott like a minute. Scott's just kind of silent because he doesn't know how to answer this. But he does concede and take Charlie with him. When he was told he could be left alone with the kid, even though he shouldn't have been there in the first place. So yeah, it looks like a kidnapping. So, that's what happens. His ex-wife and Neil, when they come back out and see that Scott and Charlie are missing, immediately file a police report, and a manhunt for Scott is immediately on the way. And basically, over the course of the next few weeks, because again, they went to pick him up around Thanksgiving, and well, he does go to do the whole Christmas Eve traveling shtick. Over the course of the next few weeks, things just keep progressing on both sides. Scott, Charlie, and the elves are getting everything ready for Christmas. Hold on again, sorry. I apologize for the constant interruptions. But anyway, things begin progressing on both sides. Scott, Charlie, and the elves are preparing for Christmas and all that. I'm not even positive. I'm just going to close it. Sorry. But again, I'm so sorry about all this. Scott, Charlie, and the elves are preparing for Christmas while back with his ex-wife and Neil, they're just going through all the police. They're going through police. They're just kind of working with the police and still looking for Scott and Charlie. And sadly, they're not making any progress. Even at one point when Charlie does call them to let them know he's okay, he doesn't stay on the line long enough for them to track it. Well, one side's getting all ready for the festive season. The other side is just worried. Is just worried that something has happened to their kid. But, bottom line, things do finally come to a head on Christmas Eve, as everything is all set up and ready. They got the sleigh going. Scott's decked out on all this new stuff, including a thermal suit that's supposed to keep him from being burned, a new decked out sleigh. Even Comet gave him a present for a rope so he doesn't fall off the roof like the last guy. So, it looks like that everything is all ready and good to go, with Scott and Charlie going off in the sleigh and once again going out for a night of delivering presents. Even Scott checks back in with the girl he met a year ago, and he's a lot nicer to her. And what I love is that when he was talking to her before, he refused to drink the milk, claiming he was lactose intolerant. So this year she put out soy milk. It's adorable. But bottom line, as they're traveling, they do end up stopping by Scott's ex-wife and Neil's house, and, well, while they did go there without harmful intent, as Charlie just wanted to drop off a present before going back to business, well, the thing is, there's a manhunt out for Scott, and they're most likely keeping an eye on that particular household, because once Scott goes down the chimney and starts dropping off presents, the police swarm the place and arrest him. So, yeah, Santa gets arrested, too. A Disney movie! But bottom line, like I said, Scott goes to jail, and Charlie's kind of left on the roof wondering what the heck's going on. However, when there's no response from Santa, the elves immediately go into action. As it turns out, they have a strike force for this called ELFS. And yes, I know that spells elves. I just don't know what all the letters stand for in their name. The point is, they are basically the guys that go in and take care of business. And so they go in, get Charlie, and they manage to break Scott out of prison, with Scott out of jail by using some tinsel that's supposed to be able to burn through metal. And so they managed to get him out of there, and pretty much they still, even when the police got Scott, they did not know where Charlie was, even though he said it was in the sleigh on the roof. But hey, I guess they just thought that was another delusion. But the point is, after the elves end up getting Scott out of prison, Scott and Charlie do go back to the house, and Neil and Scott's ex-wife, again, I know she has a name, but I keep forgetting it. They end up going on the. They're still kind of saddened about. They're still kind of scared and wondering what's going on. But once Charlie comes through the door, they're elated. In fact, his ex-wife just starts embracing him, hugging him, and kissing him, and so on and so forth. And Scott ends up seeing all this and does try to quietly leave, but Charlie does try to go with him still. And while his ex-wife does try to object, Scott instead actually gets more cordial as he tells him, look, I think it's better if you stay here for Christmas." And while Charlie is still a bit upset about this because he doesn't want his dad to leave without him, Scott does eventually say, look, you're the one that made me believe. You're the one that made me believe, and yes, I love you and I know you're safe, but there are all these kids out there, and I can't be selfish with your time, and and I can't be selfish. Your mom needs you too." And this does eventually get to Charlie, and pretty much he does think he maybe is selfish, but he's like, "Selfish? You're the one that made me believe. I think you're the least selfish kid of all." And as he embraces Charlie and they say goodbye, his ex-wife starts getting teary-eyed, and she starts believing as she sees this and thinks, "Oh my God, you really are Santa." And Neil throughout the whole film was the biggest skeptic of this, but when she finally does accept it, she says she's got to go and get something. She's got to go get something for Scott. And what I like is that Neil, just for a second, almost gives in to his belief as he looks at Scott he looks at Scott in the comment and says, "Scott." It's like, "Neil?" And then takes a closer look and is like, "Santa?" And he's like, "Oh no!" Like, he just doesn't want to believe it. Still, I love it. But point is, the present that Scott's ex-wife was bringing were the custody papers, which she immediately throws into the fire, stating that she wants Scott to come back as often as he wants to see Charlie. And so all's well that ends well. Bernard once again shows up to get Scott back on duty, and the police do want to end up going back to the house to try and get Scott, but he's already left through the chimney and is flying away. Though before they leave, Bernard tells Charlie that if he ever wants to see his dad again, all he has to do is shake the snow globe, and he'll be able to see him, which I like. I think that's sweet. But point is, Scott flies away into the night, telling "Merry Christmas to all and to all a good night." He delivers presents to all the kids. All these people on the street now see Santa flying away, giving undeniable proof that Santa Claus is real. Except who am I kidding? They're probably all just going to pretend it never happened. And in the end, Charlie still once again tries using the snow globe and calls his dad back, and so his ex-wife gives him the okay to probably go on a small trip. So yeah, that was the Santa Claus. What are my thoughts on it? Honestly, excuse me one second. I swear to God, this was unintentional. But next year I'm doing this later in the day. Hopefully there'll be less interruptions then. But bottom line, anyway, what are my thoughts on the Santa Claus? I still really enjoy this movie. I'll be first to admit, though, it's a pretty cheesy movie. Like, the idea behind it really does feel like a campy comedy. And for the most part, that's what the film likes to treat itself as. When the whole idea of Scott becoming Santa and how it begins transforming him is done silly, is just kind of silly and done through antics. You see him getting fatter, you see him gorging himself more on sweets, you see him immediately marking kids as naughty or nice, and of course there's the scene, like there's the kids coming up to him. Like, and even the ending, I'm just gonna say this right now, the ending annoys me. I'm not gonna call it a bad ending, because I do kind of like that eventually his ex-wife and her current husband are in on the secret, and they do realize, holy shit, you are Santa. Because I do kind of like that. It feels like it really does make them feel more cohesive, and in future films they do kind of become his support as he does end up getting a better relationship with them, and with his ex-wife's and with his ex-wife's husband Neil. Again, I I will remember her name at some point. I just don't remember it now. I don't think it was said enough in the episode to make or not in the movie for me to remember it. I'm so sorry. I don't like calling him. I don't certainly like calling her the ex-wife. I just sorry. The point is, it really does. But I do like that they're in on the secret. It's just the way they go about it, and they're like, "Oh, you really are Santa," and they're like, "Oh, we were just not seeing it." Like, no, I think you're kind of acting a bit more rational. I feel like it should be more mind blowing to learn that holy shit, Santa is real, and he's Charlie's father. Like, I feel like that there should be more shock to that. I feel like Neil had the most realistic reaction to it. Like, he genuinely cannot believe it. Like, he knows it's there. It's just he can't believe it. Mind you, eventually that does get kind of silly as immediately all this magical stuff starts happening. He thinks, "Oh, look at all the effort he's putting in to suck us into his delusion." Like, dude, at this point you know he's Santa. Just drop it. But at the same time, at the same time though, it still feels cheesy, like very cheesy. Like it feels forced, if that makes any sense. Like they're trying to force this feel good stuff on you, and for the most part, it does kind of is dumb. I'm not gonna deny it. I think the ending is kind of a dumb thing. It's kind of dumb, not completely, but enough to make me go ugh, when I watch it. But that being said, though, there is still a lot to enjoy about the movie, and while the cheesiness does permeate throughout it, it also does make for some very good humor. The jokes in this movie, for the most part, actually do work, and that's, I think, partially because of the acting. Tim Allen actually does turn in a good performance as Scott Calvin, who is just kind of who is just kind of a smart aleck, smart ass cynic who always likes to get in quick, who always likes to give in quick jabs whenever he can, and also while also trying to be the nice guy essentially. And for the most part, I think it works. The jabs he gives towards Neil are actually pretty funny and pretty barbed, but also kind of amusing. The way he goes about talking with his consecutives or with the other executives in the place he works when they talk about the total tank thing, I think is really nice. And I do like how he goes about things. Like he does genuinely, like when he does start finally getting into the Santa role at the beginning of the movie, like it really does feel like he's just fully embraced the madness, and even when things are, and even by that point he still wants to know what the hell's going on, because as things continue not making sense, he's just like, no, this can't be real, and he just obviously has the right reaction. But I think what also makes it better in that regard is just when they deliver lines. One of my favorite points in the movie is early on after Scott accidentally kills the original Santa. Like when he falls out, like Charlie comes around and is like, "Oh, it is Santa! You killed him!" I just love the timing of that. Like just how quickly his son does that. And that's another thing I like. I love the writing for Charlie in the movie. The child actor whose name I do not remember, I am sorry, I don't do a lot of research on that regard, but the child actor that got to play Charlie, I think actually does a good job. He gets all the inflections right, comes across as innocent, but also fun and nice, but you can tell he's his father's son, if that makes any sense. He's just as much barbed and has just as much witty repartee as his father, and knows exactly when to say things and when to not. He's just as stubborn as him, and at the same time, he's also very innocent. And one of the arcs that I do like in the movie regarding Charlie is, like I said in the plot summary, he clearly wants to love his dad. One of the things, like, it's clear from the outset that he wants to have a relationship with his dad. It's just that his dad is not putting in the right amount of effort in order to build that relationship. Case in point, early in the movie, like I said, early in the movie when Scott was on his way to meet with his ex-wife and Neil in order for them to drop off Charlie, it looked as though Charlie was hoping that Scott would not show up, and when he did, he looked disappointed. And even when he is hanging out with his dad, he's constantly talking about how better Neil is as a parent, how Neil listens to him, about all the great things Neil does. But at the same time, he does still try to talk to his dad. And while he's clearly getting more of an influence from Neil versus his own father, at the very least, he is still trying to hold on to that connection. And one little Freudian way that they showcase that he never calls Neil dad. He only refers to his own dad as that. And by the end, even when his dad says, look, Santa is real, I believe in him, and so forth, he actually does try to take that to heart and say, why don't we just put out some milk and cookies just in case? And thus, when they finally do realize that Santa is real, it kind of helps strengthen that bond, because it turns out his dad was right. His biological father was right. Santa was real. And it's made even better by the fact that even though his father has objections to the whole taking over for Santa thing, he still does it to make Charlie happy. He does, and from that they share this magical experience together. They go on an adventure together, and when he realizes his dad is Santa, it just fills him with so much life, because he knows not only is Santa real, but he's my dad. That's like what kid would not be excited about that? I think that that's a really nice arc. And by the end, he goes from being his dad. He goes from kind of being on edge with his father to wanting to just spend all this time with him. And it's honestly a really sweet transition. I think that's another thing I can give this movie. While it is cheesy, it also has heart. It really does feel like it really is trying to tell a sweet story. There actually are arcs that these characters are going on to get to these points. Case in point, going back to Scott, he starts out as a guy who's just kind of he's just a businessman through and through, and he's not dedicating as much time with his family as he should. But by that token, it's clear he's trying. He does want to be there for his son. He does want to make him happy. It's just he's not good at doing that. He doesn't know how to be there. He tries too hard in certain areas. He acts like a cynic in other places. And other times he just does not want to humor his son because he thinks it's ridiculous. But when he sees that his son is when he actually sees the hope in his son's eyes and the sadness, it does compel him to want to make him happy. It's part of the reason why he even became Santa in the first place. He wanted to originally just write the whole thing off as stupid, but when Charlie sounded disappointed that he wasn't going to, he begrudgingly put on the suit and started delivering the toys. And from that one action, that's what led him to becoming Santa. And by the end of the movie, even when he still is not believing that he's now the new Santa, Charlie is the one that convinces him. By the end, you can see that the transformation isn't just making him jollier because he's Santa, it's making him a better person overall. He's realizing that there are people in his life that he needs to dedicate time to. His son, his family, the children of the world, and it makes him ultimately become a better person for it. It doesn't change him outright. He still has this barbed tongue in the end, and he still has his funny delivery. I honestly love one of my favorite scenes is while Charlie and the elves are preparing for Christmas. They keep telling about all these decked out new features, like, hey, look, it's like, okay, we got this new state of the art sleigh going on. We got this new suit that's supposed to protect you that's supposed to be heat resistant. And he keeps asking, but what happens if I fall off the roof? Like, I love that. It's an obvious question because the only reason he got the job was because the last guy fell off the roof. I find that hilarious. Like, so of course that's going to be his main concern. Why would it be? It's like, I just got this job. I just started getting into this job. I don't want to go out this way the last guy did. I love that. I find that amusing. But the arc is really nice. And while I do still find the ending cheesy, at the very least, I do like that him becoming Santa does ultimately become a positive force. And on top of that, there is also arcs to the other characters. Going back to the ex-wife and Neil, they also have their own arcs, and what I love is the struggle they have as Scott is slowly turning into Santa. They try to come at this from a rational perspective. There's no way he's Santa. He's doing all this, and he's just gonna let Charlie down. This is ultimately gonna be harmful for Charlie in the end. They ultimately are taking steps that normal people would do, but in some cases they're a bit resistant to it. Neil more than the ex-wife, but it's clear that there's some hesitation to it. They know that in the end of the day, Scott does care about Charlie and wants him to be happy. It's just that if this is the way he's trying to do it, it's only going to make things worse for Charlie in the end. So it does make the decision, they realize that the choice of taking away his visitation might be necessary, but is this the route they want to go? And from there, it does lead to some good character growth, as they've been talking about, as while they're getting ready for the hearing, they do have a talk about Santa and when they stop believing. And basically, the ex-wife stopped believing when one year when she was around Charlie's age, she wanted to get a mystery date game and it never arrived. Whereas Neil, he stopped believing it. He was 3 because apparently he wanted an Oscar Mayer weenie whistle and he never got it. So that's yeah, that's a little that's kind of heartbreaking. But again, it's actually compelling story, and when they finally do realize he really is Santa, and and he genuinely does care about Charlie and doesn't want him doesn't want him running away from his family or his mother just to make Scott happy. It really does lead to them growing closer. Again, it doesn't lead to Scott and his ex-wife getting back together in the end, but it does lead to make their relationship more positive. Because in the beginning of the movie, they were kind of at each other. They kind of were biting at each other's throats. Not to the point where they were all completely hostile to one another, but enough so that you could tell that you could kind of see why they probably divorced in the first place. It's actually really interesting, and I like how they do that. And kind of going on that same note, the acting is actually really well done from all the characters. I already talked about Charlie, and I think how his actor was good, but Tim Allen turns in a good performance, still being snarky and nice. The ex-wife definitely gets all the emotion across of a concerned mother trying to do the best, trying to do the best thing for her child while also showcasing the heart and soul behind her, and that not everything she's doing is fueled by spite. She is genuinely worried, and while she does want Charlie and Scott to have a healthy relationship, she does not want it to be at the expense of Charlie losing his faith. And then likewise, I think Neil. I like Neil too. I think he's an appropriate kind of, but he's the appropriate straight man for everything because he is the guy that comes at things rationally and is the most skeptical of the whole Santa thing. But at the same time, it's also pretty funny seeing him kind of occasionally crapped on by Scott. Like there's one scene when Scott goes to see his ex-wife and Neil after his ex-wife and Neil caught Charlie play acting at Eddie Santa, and so as they're talking about it, it's like, oh, I'm so sorry, but I think you should be more worried that where are you going to get sweaters when the circus in town? He just gives him and he just shits on his sweater, and so at that point he shoot off so he can go to talk to Charlie. But the instant Scott's out of earshot, he's like, Neil looks at the ex-wife and says, "Okay, you're right about the sweater. Okay." I love that sort of thing, and it's just nice. Again, I feel like that's some actually good acting. And another thing I like is the sets. The sets really do look very intricate and nice, and do properly convey their own things. They're not all amazing, I'll openly admit. It's clear this film was made in the 90s because some stuff definitely looks cheap. You can definitely tell where there's a cardboard cutout instead of an actual place. You can and when they actually try to do digital effects, it really does not mesh well. It looks pretty dumb. It looks very dated, even by 90s standards. But on the flip side of that, it does still help portray the mystical and honestly joyful nature of everything, especially in the North Pole, which, like I said, really does feel magical when you see all the elves running around like kids with little like glitter, with little specks of glitter on their cheeks just shining. It really does make the thing feel very pure and nice and full of that Christmas magic. It really does make the film feel more special, if that makes any sense. And it really does carry with it. And again, going back to the arc with Charlie, Scott, his ex-wife, and Neil, it really does, like, despite the cheesiness of the ending, I do like how things do come together and how becoming Santa does ultimately make Scott a better person. It improves his relationship with his son, and nothing about improves his relationship with his son, it improves his relationship with his ex-wife and her husband. I like seeing where it goes and him eventually accepting the role and realizing this isn't just about me. It's about my son. It's about all these other people, and realizing just how much people rely on him, and that how much he wants to do it. It's honestly very sweet, and by the end, it does get you in the heart. It really does feel nice and wholesome. It really does feel like a Christmas movie. It's a cheesy Christmas movie in certain areas, and like I said, there are some areas that I do kind of groan at. Some of the jokes don't most of the jokes work. There are some that I feel just don't land. The sets and effects do look tacky and by today's standards, and the ending, while being sweet, can also be cheesy. Although another part of the thing I like is that Scott does deliver the presents that his ex-wife and Neil never got when they were kids, so I like that. But overall, I think The Santa Claus is a good movie, and I can see why many people consider it a Christmas classic. It's got a lot of heart. It's got a lot of it's got plenty of heart, great jokes, a nice storyline, great acting, good character growth for all the characters involved. It's just chock full of that Christmas sweetness that kind of gets you right here. And overall, it's a cheesy but ultimately enjoyable experience that I'm happy to own as part of my DVD collection, and will most likely happily watch at any other point in the year. So Actually any other point around Christmas, sorry. But yeah, barring any more interruptions, I think that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this little foray into a new type of vlog, and hopefully next year we'll look at a different Christmas special. Will it be a sequel to the Santa Claus? Will it be something Christmas Carol related? Or will it just be something Christmassy, like the Polar Express? Or maybe maybe a Christmas episode of a TV show? We won't know. We'll just have to see and find out. So, if you enjoyed this, I hope to see you next year, or you can tune into my regular Friday vlogs. I'm currently doing Steven Universe, so. With all that said, thank you for watching. I hope you have a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays and a Happy New Year. And as always, I'll see you next time. Take care.